Hello everyone, welcome to the online job search. My name is Nick. I'll be your instructor for this workshop, and let's get started right away. So today we'll be talking about how the online job search goes. So we're talking about job search engines and job search boards, what we'll need to apply. One of the bigger things of the class is talking about those applicant tracking systems. You may have heard that before. If not, we'll talk about how important those things are and how to get around them. We'll also be talking about some sort of pre-employment tests or screening applications, and we'll also go into a little detail about job scams and generally how to avoid them, as those could be troublesome if we're not aware. So first and foremost, where are we going to apply? One of the first answers is PA CareerLink, so this is not just a shameless plug, I promise. PA CareerLink is a great website to use, our website, because with that website, every job on there, all those positions and employers are people who we at CareerLink work with directly to put them on there. It's not just they anonymously put it on there whenever they want. They work with our staff directly to put it on there, so those jobs are safe, which is a great thing to know, especially with the conversation of job scams we'll have a little later on today. Please make sure that you're using the site effectively. If you do find something that does look a little fishy, please tell a staff member right away. It may be a little difficult in this time, but make sure you give us a call if you do find something like that, and we'll fix it right away. Where else could you apply, however? Some of these will probably look familiar, but just a general grab bag of a bunch of different job search engines. Indeed is probably the most popular one. That's definitely a great one to use. It's definitely recommended by me. The symbol right below there, that green symbol, is Glassdoor. That's another great website to use. You may have heard of that before. If not, I do highly recommend checking that out. Career Builder is another type of job search engine. Monster, while dying out ever so slightly, is still good in some cases. And then LinkedIn. LinkedIn's another great one. The packet goes into a little more detail about LinkedIn and how that website is for job searching. Because there is a lot of different benefits to LinkedIn as opposed to some of these other sites where you're a little less anonymous on that site. So I do recommend, if you haven't checked out LinkedIn yet, check that LinkedIn website out. We're hopefully going to have that LinkedIn workshop up and running on the online workshops pretty soon, so please be on the lookout for that if you're someone who's not wholly familiar with the LinkedIn site. Alright, so let's take a look at how we may want to job search. This may be familiar for some of you. If not, that's what we're here for. With job searching on those job search engines, we're going to typically job search by the desired job title and or job keyword or type. But there's different filters we can add on in these websites to make it a little more specific and make our job searching time more efficient. So we can kind of narrow choices down by saying, okay, maybe I want to be a recruiter, but I want to work in the healthcare industry. I can change the field or industry right there. Okay, I want to be a recruiter, I want to work in the healthcare industry, but I want to work only within 25 miles of Allentown, PA, location, for example. Maybe I can put recruiter or talent acquisition to have some more industry-specific tools or verbiage in there. I could also specifically look up, maybe I want to be a recruiter at St. Luke's or LVHN specifically within that healthcare field. So we definitely want to utilize a lot of these different keywords to help make our job search much more efficient, so we're not endlessly scrolling through page after page after page of jobs we don't really want. In the tutorial video on how to do an online job search, I show you how all these keywords work together on the Indeed website, so definitely watch that as well. To get a little more concrete idea of how these keywords work together. Next, we have our little job application checklist here. A little cluttery, but I'll explain it nice and neat. So first and foremost, we need our updated resume and our updated cover letter. We do need the cover letter. A lot of people ask, is a cover letter necessary? It certainly is necessary. If you haven't watched the Resume Writing 101 video, please go ahead and watch that to get a little more information about resume writing and cover letter writing in particular. Just make sure these documents are customized to the job you're going into. We'll talk about what those customization options will be when we get to the applicant tracking systems, but essentially, to cut it short, the language on your resume, the language on your cover letter should match the language on the job description to make sure it gets picked up. The other thing we want to do with these documents, and any documents we might submit otherwise, is make sure we follow the application instructions specifically, and whatever it says in that job description, that's what we want to do. So for example, sometimes they're going to ask for a specific format, a file type. So whether it's a Word document or a PDF or whatever they're asking for, we want to make sure we follow that in particular. We also want to have a professional email address. So if you haven't had a chance to make a Gmail account, I would highly recommend it. If you use anything like Yahoo or Hotmail or AOL or anything like that, I'd probably get rid of that. Those websites, those email addresses are generally considered unprofessional by most employers. So I would definitely recommend getting a Gmail because it has a lot of great benefits to it. The main bit of the email as well is having it professionally oriented. So you can see I have the example there, first name dot last name. You usually don't have to do it that way, but you should have your name in there in some way, shape, or form. Why do we do that? Well, sometimes you may need to email your application. Sometimes you may need to just email in general. Certainly that will happen at some point during any interview process. And so you want your email to be professional, and so when someone sees it, they know who specifically you're talking to, hence the idea behind putting your name in there. So again, it could be first name dot last name, it could be last name dot first name. It could just be your first and last name together without the dot. It could be your first initial last name, whatever you're more comfortable with. That is something I would highly recommend. Do try to avoid numbers and special characters if possible. For example, trying to have like a dollar sign symbol or an exclamation mark or an asterisk like it says there. Just avoiding that if you can. Of course, if you do have a more generic name, you may need to add a number. If that is the case, that's okay. Just don't go crazy with the numbers. Don't put in your birthday year or anything like that. Just put in a simple 1 or 2 or 3. Something nice and neat at the end there. It doesn't really get in the way of how professional your email should look. And we also want an employment history. So a lot of that information should be on the resume, but we may want that in particular to explain a little bit more if we're applying for different certain kinds of jobs, especially because sometimes those applications need you to reiterate, your employment history in the application itself. So make sure you do have that ready to go. Particularly have those months and years ready. If you're not sure of a month and year from a past job, try to narrow that down. Get a good idea of what that could be so you can have that ready for the job application. And lastly, right there at the bottom, you may have to list your work availability. This depends on what kind of job or field you're going into. For example, the restaurant industry, you may need to list availability because maybe they need you to work weekends or holidays or whatever it might be. So just be prepared to do that if you are in one of those more specific fields there. Alright, so let's talk about one of the bigger things today with applicant tracking systems. So companies, mid to large size companies, for example, don't typically look at every resume. In fact, they don't look at every resume that comes through their pipelines. They have an applicant tracking system do a lot of that work for them. So what is an applicant tracking system? Well, it's a computer program, again, primarily used by mid to large size companies to scan through job applications. So primarily it's underlined there because, again, the majority of people or companies using this are of a mid to large size variety, but smaller companies are using this day by day because they are getting cheaper and easier to use day by day. So we always want to assume that an applicant tracking system is viewing our resume. Essentially what happens with the applicant tracking system is that the employer is going to give these systems certain keywords, typically the skills required to do the job, and they say, okay, find me resumes and cover letters and applications with these keywords on there. It could be 5, it could be 10, it could be 15, it doesn't matter. Find me these resumes, these keywords. And the applicant tracking system says beep, boop, bop, you got it. And so it goes through all the applications, it finds keywords, maybe it gets a pipeline of 300 resumes, and it spits out another 75, says, okay, these are the ones you want. To the rest of them, they all get that automated response, thank you, we're moving on with other applicants, or whatever it might say. And again, those applications that did actually satisfy the criteria, that got the correct keywords in the resume, in the cover letter, in the application itself, those are the ones that are pushed forward. So if you ever felt like you sent your resume into a black hole, or you got one of those automated responses back right away, an applicant tracking system is probably the reason why. Many of you probably have had, stellar resumes that had all the important information on there, but it may have just didn't satisfy the applicant tracking system in particular. So let's learn a bit about how we're going to tackle the applicant tracking systems. So how can we get past these things? First and foremost, as stated already, follow the instructions of the application exactly, down to a T. Do not, stray away. If they're asking you to do this thing, make sure you do that thing. So follow them exactly because that probably goes hand in hand of how the applicant tracking system is going to view your resume. Make sure you're submitting or omitting the correct documents in the correct format. So again, if they're asking for Word documents, everything should be Word documents. If they're asking for PDFs, everything should be PDFs, so on and so forth. And really make sure that you're submitting all the required documents or optional documents you can submit, And if you can't submit any documents, for example, sometimes some employers don't want a cover letter, so they don't give you an option to submit a cover letter. So don't try to submit a cover letter into the resume slot, because that's not going to work with the system and work with the employer. So make sure you are reading the job description, again, down to a T on those instructions. But the main bit when it comes to applicant tracking systems is using those exact keywords from the job description. I'm going to show you sort of how to do this in the online job search tutorial that goes hand in hand with this presentation. But make sure to understand here, I'll explain it real briefly. So let's say, for example, on an application you're looking at, one of the main skills is detail-oriented. They really want a detail-oriented person to work this position. And on your resume, you have attention to detail as one of your major skills. You might think to yourself, that's great, I have the skill they're looking for, but the applicant tracking system wasn't told to look for attention to detail, it was told to look for detail-oriented. So, even though attention to detail and detail-oriented mean essentially the same thing, it's not going to get picked up because it's not detail-oriented. So, some of those minor changes in customization options we talked about earlier are changing the keywords to specifically match the keywords on the resume. So in this instance, I would change attention to detail to detail-oriented because that's what the applicant tracking system is looking for. And that's what you want to do with any of the keywords in particular. Not to say that you're going to have all the keywords they're looking for. You may need to add in some keywords and take out some other keywords from your resume, depending on what kind of application you're looking at. And there is no good number. I didn't mention 5, 10, 15 earlier. There is no good number. I always give people 8 as a guess, but every applicant tracking system is going to work differently. It's also going to depend on the length of the job description, so a longer job description will give you more keywords. A shorter job description will give you less keywords. So definitely be on the lookout for those job descriptions and read through. And again, please watch the tutorial video as this topic is explained in much more detail with much clearer examples as to what we're doing. And lastly, don't get too fancy with your documents or your application, particularly with the resume. The applicant tracking system sheet in the handout with this class goes into this with a little more detail. But watch your bullet points, make sure you don't have any pictures on there. Don't use any resume templates or builders. There are certain fonts you want to use, and there's a lot of other random little notes on that. But definitely watch out for some of those things, because anything that might be too fancy, as I called it, or too out there as it comes to the resume, could set off an applicant tracking system. For example, the number one thing I typically go over is a lot of people like to have a horizontal black line under their header, separating their header from the rest of their resume. While this may look aesthetically pleasing and nice to a person, it usually messes up the applicant tracking system and causes it either to say no or screw with the formatting on your resume entirely. So avoid anything like that, horizontal, vertical black lines, or anything of that nature. Really read through that applicant tracking system's handout right there to get some more specific choices here and there. Alright, so last topic within the online job searching aspect of this workshop is talent assessments. Now these aren't going to be as common in the job application step, but you may come across these here and there, so I will go over these in particular. The most common are going to be the personality tests. And these are generally just used by companies to see if the personality of the applicant fits into the company culture. So you might have heard some personality tests out there. The big one out there is the Myers-Briggs type assessment. And a lot of companies use something like the Myers-Briggs or the Myers-Briggs itself to get an idea of what kind of person they are, what their personality is when it comes to in relation to the job. So definitely be prepared to take some personality tests. I highly recommend taking personality tests on your own time. It doesn't have to be the Myers-Briggs test. It can be any other personality test you'll find, just to get an idea of what concretely these personality tests are going to say, because we all know if we're more introverted or extroverted as people, and so on and so forth. But what does that all mean? How can we express that and deal with those personality assessments in the future? That's really what the main idea behind this is. And we have the workplace aptitudes exams, excuse me. And these are just basic skills tests, as I usually call them. They're going to test general workplace knowledge, such as arithmetic or math, communication, reading comprehension, organizational skills, especially if you are in a position that has to deal with a lot of organization or inventory management. So these may pop up. Again, these aren't as likely, especially not as likely as the personality test, but these certainly may pop up here and there. And lastly, these are the job-specific tests. These tests specifically are not as likely. Typically, this is an interview function that the employer may use, but it could possibly come up. And this is essentially a test that's going to simulate what the real job would be like, and essentially you're getting dropped in to what the job will be like in a controlled environment. And this can take many different forms. It can be the employers be acting as customers and you have to answer their questions. It could be a program or service that you decide to use. It could be any number of things. So definitely be on the watch out for all of that information right then and there. Alright, so let's talk about online job search scams. So what are online job scams? Well, they're scams as any other scams. They're meant to trick job seekers into providing any sensitive information such as social security numbers, credit card information, and bank account information. And that's the main area we'll be looking at when it comes to these scams today. There are some scams, however, who also just advertise undesirable positions, as we might call them, in order to get a job seeker to either pay for training materials or simply just to work a position that is otherwise not what they were originally looking for. But again, we're mostly looking at that first one there. So these are all the different kinds of job scams that are out there. We're not going to go over each one in particular. They all kind of follow the same warning signs, so there's no need to go over any ones of them in particular. These are all the ones that could be out there. The work from home is probably the most popular one, where they're advertising a great work from home position that pays all this money. Certainly there are jobs, especially nowadays, there are jobs that are work from home. But we just have to be careful if they're offering, a $100,000 salary for a 20-hour work from home job. That's very clearly not going to be a real job out there. What are those warning signs that a job scam could be at play? Well, of course, as I just mentioned, if the pay is too great for little work and the job is just too good to be true, as the saying goes, if it's too good to be true, it probably isn't. So keep that in the back of your mind. Certainly, if the job is great and it's paying you all this money and you don't have to do all this work, it's probably not a real job. We can also be on the lookout if the recruiter contacted you first. This isn't an immediate sign that it's a job scam. Many recruiters are very much into cold calling, especially if they work for a staffing agency. But it is something to be on the guard for. Typically, recruiters are going to wait for applicants to come to them, I should say. It really comes into play if the recruiter is getting super eager to get you to the job with little to no interviewing or screening. Any recruiter worth their stock is going to screen you and interview you with at least a couple different people before they decide to hire you. So that's a definite job scam sign that the recruiter might be trying to do some sort of phishing or scam otherwise topic here. The recruiter's email address could be unprofessional, so it could not look as it normally should. And of course, if they start asking for personal information, that's when you know that there's an issue. Another of course situation, if they ask you to pay for something or if they send you a check, that's a definite no-no. This happens a lot where sometimes people will apply for a job and they say, oh, it's great, let's get you started right away. We're going to send you a check, go buy your training materials, and keep a little extra money for yourself. And what happens is that check actually bounces and the person is out, X amount of money for all that training materials, and the scammer got away with their money. So you really don't want to do that. If any employer with quotation marks, I know you can't see them, are sending you checks, that's immediate scam. Shut that down. Notify the appropriate authorities right away, because that's certainly a scam if they want you to pay for something or buy something, because typically that's not going to be what any interviewer or interview process will ask of you. It can also come into play when the job description is vague. Again, this is not a sure sign that the job is a scam. Some people do write very vague job descriptions for no discernible reason. But it is one of the warning signs that they didn't put a lot of stock into writing a fully realized job description. The emails could contain spelling errors or grammatical errors, not to stereotype, of course, but many job scams do come from outside the United States, so sometimes English isn't their first language, the scammers that is, and so sometimes they are missing important spelling or grammatical things because of English being their second language. And of course, if they set up an interview in something like a messaging service such as Google Hangouts is probably the most infamous one, that's definitely something you want to watch out for. They're going to give you a much more specific and professional looking interviewing module, such as Uvu, for example, to set up some sort of call. Alright, so how can we avoid job scams? First and foremost, of course, any of those warning signs pop up, we definitely want to be on the lookout for that. Research is going to be our best bet here, especially if it's a company that we're not so well known of. Definitely research what the company might be if they're a very small or unknown company. If you've done research, you've seen some of the warning signs, but you're still not sure, another surefire tactic is simply Googling the company name or the recruiter's name, followed by the word scam, to see if anything comes up. You might find some other people ran into the same person or group of people that you are, and it could be an issue there to look into. The other thing we want to do is pull resumes from sites like Indeed, Monster, or LinkedIn. So it is very helpful to have your resume on Indeed. It makes applications a little easier. However, this is an easy way for a scammer to get a hold of your email address just by simply pulling that resume. It's not really that hard to find someone's email address or phone number nowadays. It's not really a difficult thing to do with the way the internet works. But it's just an easier avenue for them. It's just really giving them the contact information. Not to say they can do anything with that contact information, but more so it's the ability to contact you and possibly trick you into making you believe they are the legitimate thing. And as we talked about with the applicant tracking systems, you're going to be changing your resume every time you look at a job description, so that is even more credence just to not have your resume be static and on the website all the time. So the things we have to watch out for are the email addresses and company URLs, because job scammers, for what they are very smart people many times. They do try to trick people into letting their guard down. Even people who know a lot about job scams sometimes get tricked by this into thinking they are an actual company. So how can they do this? Well, for example, let's say the scammer is impersonating company XYZ. And let's say the real email for an employee of that company is job@companyxyz.com. And the fake email, the scammer email, is jobs@company-xyz.com. The only two changes there are the S and the dash there. So it's really minor. And sometimes it could just be that dash and the S isn't there at all. So it could be just that minor. And someone could see that and say, oh, okay, I know XYZ company. I'm really a big fan of them. I really want to work for them. And it turns out they actually are giving their information over to a scammer. So it could be that simple. Always double check before clicking on anything or sending anything or replying to anything. Make sure it is a legitimate employer. This could also happen with the company URL, the address for the website. So again, the real address for the website could be companyxyz.com, and the fake one would be company-xyz. And again, in this case, the dash is the only thing that makes a difference. And even then, if you're going through all these warning signs, you're seeing the company email and you're not sure, call the company up and say, hey, this person called me claiming to be from your company. Do you have a person of this name on file? And they'll tell you whether that person is an employee there or not. And if not, then they are definitely a scammer and something you definitely want to back out of. Here's some different agencies and entities to report job scams. The Internet Crime Complaint Center and the Federal Trade Commission are both government organizations that kind of regulate these things. The Better Business Bureau is a great resource not only to report people or report scammers, but also to look up the credibility of different companies if you're unsure. As well as different sites like Indeed and Monster and LinkedIn typically have a Contact Indeed or Contact Monster page, report a problem that you can report to those sites directly, because sometimes it takes a little bit to get back down the pipeline from those bigger entities to the smaller sites like Indeed and Monster, for example. So definitely report it across the board just to make sure not only are you safeguarding yourself, but safeguarding other potential job seekers. And that's everything we need to talk about today in this module. Like I said, please review the packet in more detail. It expands on a lot of this information, explaining a lot of those different things in more detail, especially the bit about applicant tracking systems. If you haven't already, please watch the applicant tracking systems and applications website, or the video that goes over the tutorial about how to go about a job search, for everything there. Otherwise, thank you guys for listening in. I hope everyone stays healthy and safe, and keep on keeping on, everyone.